Nuclear war has begun. Trump has launched a ballistic missile. In response, Putin begins nuclear tests. Are people in Russia ready to overthrow Putin? Is it bunker paranoia or the end of the regime?
I don't understand what's going on. Honestly, even I don't understand.
The Kremlin Grandpa's new bipolar episode. In the morning, Russia seems almost saintly.
Our country doesn't threaten anyone. And
In the evening, Putin is once again shaking his limp Oreshnik.
we have created and put on standby and started mass production of the medium-range missile system Oreshnik.
Where has the real Putin gone? The Kremlin is feeding Russians canned food again. Beijing is abandoning Moscow. No one expected things to turn out this way.
China, following India, has suspended its oil purchases from Russia. And this is no longer just pressure, it's a blow to the Kremlin's budget.
It turns out that even 3 days for Kiev is a lot.
If we wanted to, and with our capabilities, the entire Ukrainian conflict could be resolved in 30 minutes.
Nuclear war?
Well, whether it's 30 minutes or 3.5 years, of course, Gurulev, the booze general, is wrong as usual. He makes slips of the tongue, but we won't allow that on our broadcast. We will clearly discuss what Putin's blackmail leads to, namely that an intercontinental ballistic missile has already been tested in the US, the Kremlin is now backtracking, World War III is closer than ever. But we, friends, will be watching all of this unfold together, because things could flare up in Venezuela as well. You know that Maduro's regime is practically falling apart at the seams. The Americans are practically one step away from launching a military operation there. Maduro is asking the Russians for missiles. Oh, there's a lot of news piling up. Let's take a look at a segment on the most important international events, and then I'll see you in the studio where we'll discuss everything in detail with an expert. Let's go.
A truce or the calm before the storm. China has announced the suspension of an additional 24% tariff on American goods. This relief will last for a year. At the same time, the basic 10% tariff, which was introduced in response to a similar tariff by Trump announced in April, remains in place.
The US is the largest market for goods. China is the largest producer of goods. How does China make money? By supplying its products to the largest markets. And as we noted, the US is the main one.
The decision to renew the agreements was made after a meeting between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping, according to Reuters. Thanks to this, tariffs of up to 15% on certain types of agricultural products from the US have also been lifted.
From an economic point of view, China and the US cannot really be, let's say, not exactly in different camps, but they can't be adversaries. In fact, they are in different camps since they are competing over who is the leading economy.
The Chinese Ministry of Finance noted that starting March 4th, they will suspend all tariffs on soybeans and other agricultural products from the US, including corn, wheat, sorghum, and chicken. It was stated that the decision was made in accordance with the consensus reached during economic and trade consultations between China and the US.
Therefore, despite all the political ambitions and attempts to show that we can compete, that we will be leaders and so on, let me emphasize, from the perspective of China's economic interests, it needs the US.
The US and China have also agreed to establish a direct line of communication between their armed forces. As stated by Pentagon Chief Pete Hegseth, this will help prevent potential conflicts between the countries. Another step China has taken towards the US is its refusal to import Russian oil. According to Bloomberg, major state-owned companies and smaller private enterprises in China have canceled nearly half of their oil shipments from Russia following the US sanctions against Rosneft and Lukoil in October.
When the question arises of whom China will choose, Russia or the US, one must understand a simple thing. There is the US, and its largest state is California. And California's economy is twice the size of Russia's economy. A single state in the United States of America has an economy equal to 2 Russian economies. Naturally, for China, the US is far more important than Russia.
Putin absolutely does not want to let go of one of his few remaining partners. That's why he sent his prime minister with greetings to Beijing. As a result of the negotiations, the parties signed about 10 documents on cooperation in the fields of energy, space, and high technology.
Russia is of interest to China as a supplier of raw materials and goods. But Russia doesn't really have much choice except to sell everything to China. China understands that Russia is dependent on it and that Russia won't take any steps against it. And with America, it's interesting because it's a sales market.
According to Ukraine's Foreign Intelligence Service, Russia is sinking ever deeper into economic dependence on China. Raw material projects in the Far East and Siberia are turning the region into a resource base for China. Meanwhile, local communities are left out of the promised benefits.
Vyacheslav Maltsev is joining our broadcast, chairman of the National Committee for the Fight Against Putin. Vyacheslav, hello, we're glad to see you.
Hello, it is nice to see you today.
Let's talk about these methods of fighting against Putin. So Putin spent a week stroking the Burevestnik, Poseidon, Yars, waving them around in front of the whole world. After that, Trump snapped and said, all right, let's test our nukes. They launched a Minuteman III interballistic nuclear missile, an intercontinental ballistic missile. There are some important details here. And now Putin says, let's go on and test Novaya Zemlya. As I understand it, Novaya Zemlya is a test site. Where could all this lead? Could you please tell us? Everything seems to be escalating very rapidly. Are we really facing two figures who are ready to bring the world to nuclear war, or will one of them back down first?
Well, let's start with the Minute Veni, shall we? It's an old missile, not a very new one. Well, they launched it, so they launched it. There's really nothing particularly special about that. Why did this happen, as I understand it? Because a few years ago, if you look it up, I'm sure it's still on the internet, there was a very serious scandal. Moreover, during Trump's first administration, it turned out that there were, let's say, issues with motivation. Launching missiles was going very badly. In other words, they conducted an investigation and found that the people manning these missiles were not ready to launch them. That was the first thing. Then it turned out there was massive unprofessionalism, drug abuse, and technical malfunctions. There were even concerns voiced that these missiles might not fly anywhere at all, but essentially, this missile is only needed to serve as a threat. Yes, and for nothing else really, just like Putin's Yars, Topol, and so on. So how exactly would a third world nuclear war be waged if we're talking about that? Well, definitely not with the Minuteman. Imagine this. The US Strategic Command decides to launch a strike with their renowned third-generation missiles, and the strike is carried out preemptively. The missile takes 37 minutes to reach its target, and during that time, there would be massive launches of missiles from Putin's silos and other deployment sites, including mobile ones, which, as I understand it, four-star generals estimate would result in 100 million casualties for the US. Is Trump ready to accept 100 million casualties? Well, probably not. That's why a strategy like using strategic missiles doesn't work and can't work. In today's world, only one strategy can be effective. BDs, delivering strategic strikes with tactical means. So, for example, bombers arrive, including advanced frontline aircraft such as the F-15 Eagle. And they also bring in the B-61 bomb, which is a significant addition to their arsenal. They can be different models, like the 13th, 12th, or even the 11th model, which is a bunker-busting bomb. They can penetrate bunkers with Putin inside, or bunkers with nuclear missiles located in silos. And so, in this particular way, four-star generals see that if such an operation is actually carried out, taking into account sabotage and cyber attacks, and a whole lot more, the Putin loyalists will still, of course, fire from some submarines, although most of them will be destroyed, and that very Khabarovsk submarine that was launched and is supposed to fire its Poseidons, it won't fire anything anywhere, because 2 US nuclear submarines will be tailing it, keeping watch. When it sets out, it's obvious that it's on some kind of mission, and it will be promptly destroyed the moment it opens its torpedo tubes. So, in other words, the Putin regime understands that with such a strike, they would have very big problems. Yes, they might launch some kind of strategic strike against the US, but first of all, their weapons aren't very new. And secondly, the Americans are deploying weapons in space that no one really knows anything about. How it will work and how they're deploying it, they've been researching this for a very long time. They're X-planes which fly up there in large numbers, and they're drones that stay in space for 800 days at a time. So no one knows what exactly they're doing up there. But most likely, this is precisely a kind of strategic initiative. That is, if Putin launches a strike, the losses in the US would be a few million, not 100 million. And that's why, of course, if the decision is made to strike first, it will be exactly this kind of attack. If the decision is made to strike second, well, yes, some number of these mini planes will probably be launched, but the US will still suffer losses. The losses would be monstrous, simply monstrous. And that's why I think they don't really consider this as a retaliatory strike. It would be foolish to think of it as a retaliatory strike. As for what Trump says about Putin conducting some kind of nuclear tests, well, he is referring to this Maravesnik, which, according to Putin, contains a nuclear power unit. In fact, I'm sure that the Burevestnik has never flown anywhere because we have no such information and we constantly receive updates from the test sites. 2 years ago, the test site on Novaya Zemlya was essentially reactivated, the same place where underground nuclear charges were detonated. In August, it began operating at full capacity, and we were receiving reports from there. This kind of activity indicates preparations for an underground nuclear explosion. And in fact, we recorded this and thought that Putin would probably conduct an underground nuclear explosion before the new year, trying to scare the West that way. That is, he would withdraw from the nuclear test ban treaty, the treaty prohibiting nuclear tests. And so he was supposed to conduct a series of underground nuclear tests, but for some reason, which remains unclear to us, he ultimately did not proceed with them. We don't know exactly why this decision was made. Perhaps it was for purely political reasons, because from a technical standpoint, everything was already prepared and ready to go. Even a highly experienced specialist who is quite elderly and has a long history in this field was specifically brought in for this important work. So we know this particular detail for sure. Now, if we talk about the scenario of Trump responding to some kind of Chinese nuclear activity, or perhaps an action by Putin involving nuclear weapons by launching the Minuteman missile, that's actually considered a rather weak response in this context. What does the US lack for nuclear war? They lack a lot, seriously. They lack cruise missiles. The United States has plenty of slow-moving. Oh Lord, everything. America, the Americans are trying to master things in Ukraine, but somehow it's not working out. So Vyacheslav.
Yes. Please finish your thought. Is there anything you'd like to clarify?
2 Tomahawks, that's what they have, but they're not nuclear, right? The last nuclear Tomahawks were dismantled in 2011. They're slow moving, and even if somehow they manage to make them nuclear, which is doubtful because it would require a huge amount of work, it still wouldn't work out. And that's a big drawback, meaning the missiles that could be classified as intermediate range missiles of that class, because of the treaty that was once signed with the Soviet Union. After the elimination of intermediate range missiles, the Americans no longer have this class of weapon, but the Chinese do, and in large numbers, a very large number of such missiles, including cruise missiles that can fly quite far. And now there's a new block that's been developed, which is delivered by an intermediate range missile. It's actually, in a sense, almost like a kind of space plane. This block is a drone, a kind of small aircraft that serves as a carrier for nuclear weapons. The missile delivers it to a location where it begins to maneuver, locks onto its target, and can perform quite complex maneuvers, even loitering for a long time. In other words, it can make decisions regarding its target. This is, of course, very important. The United States does not have such weapon systems. And right now, of course, the United States should be focusing on developing these kinds of weapon systems rather than heavy ballistic missiles. Of course, those are also necessary for certain threats, but at the moment they are not decisive.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Vyacheslav, I want to ask you about something. To what extent do you agree with the hypothesis that the US is gradually separating not Russia from China, but China from Russia? Western media write about this, referring to the points of the agreement signed between the US and China. Well, first of all, they signed a trade agreement aimed at restoring economic balance, which means that, supposedly, there shouldn't be an economic war in the coming year. That's all theory. Protection of national security under the pretext of supporting workers and businesses. So, moving on, point 2. China is cutting back on oil purchases from Russia due to US sanctions. That's what Bloomberg is writing about. What do you think? Will China actually go for such a move? If not a complete break from Russia, then at least a reduction in activity. Or is all of this impossible? And are these just false goals and objectives?
Look, just imagine this for a moment. A wild, shaggy, and truly scary dog is hungrily devouring some poor, helpless piglet, right? And then all of a sudden someone shows up and bravely tries to pull it away from this delicious, tasty piglet. What do you think this scary dog will do to them? Of course, it will tear them apart. This dog or dragon is China and the fat piglet is Russia. Who can pull China away from Russia if it already wants to digest it, has basically swallowed it and is digesting it? So making it spit it out is quite a challenge. The negotiations that took place between Xi Jinping and Trump did not impress anyone, to put it mildly. But perhaps both leaders needed this particular meeting, this opportunity, in order to show the score. For someone, well, for Trump, it's clear he once again decisively defeated everyone, stopped all the wars, the great ender of wars. Everything is wonderful. But what is actually happening? Well, China is buying soybeans from the United States. It's laughable, especially since they were already buying all that anyway. China is making incredible purchases of food. They have food reserves for more than 5 years. In other words, China could feed its entire population for 5 years absolutely free, and everything would be fine. If China were to dump such a huge amount of food onto the global market and sell it for next to nothing, it would crash the prices for agricultural products and food and simply destroy everyone. That is, in Canada, in the United States, wherever there are farmers and agricultural producers, they would simply go under because food would be worth nothing. So this is a kind of ace up China's sleeve. From the standpoint of food security, there's nothing you can do about it. And by all other indicators, the globalists built a global economic policy, and China became that global economic policy. Today, the world economy is China. If the world economy has a name, that name is China. Americans, maybe they'll come up with something, maybe they'll be able to do something. These are the people who don't analyze what's happening in the world right now in relation to China's economy. The United States doesn't interest China at all from an economic standpoint. For them, it would be ideal if the United States didn't exist at all, neither from a political nor from an economic perspective. On the eve, China calmly not only would survive, but would continue to thrive perfectly well without them. And that's why for China, it would actually be very important to provoke Putin into a nuclear war with the US. And for China, the best case scenario would be for Putin to launch nuclear strikes on Europe and the US, get hit back in return, and that's it. Immediately, the third stratagem, kill with someone else's knife, would be realized, and Xi Jinping would win with someone else's knife, and China would become the undisputed leader. Right now, the US military machine is still stronger than China's, and that worries China. China's economy is already much stronger than the US economy. Even last year, China's gross domestic product was about 25% higher than that of the United States. And that's not just my conclusion. It's the conclusion of relevant experts, such as those from the International Monetary Fund and so on. So these are official experts who used to talk about the unattainability of the US economy, but now, to put it mildly, it's in decline, while China will continue to dominate because China is not just a national economy, and that's important to understand. China has spread its tentacles everywhere. Half of Africa is China, half of Latin America as well. China is currently holding a significant meeting in Beijing, the capital city of China, with the League of Latin American, or more specifically, South American and Caribbean countries. It's just hilarious. What does Beijing have to do with it? Beijing is supposedly a Caribbean country now. No, it just controls the whole system. And Sessenfin very openly talks about global governance. In other words, he gathers all his lackeys and declares that they will globally govern the world. And they're already doing it. And what does he get in response? Nothing. He gets Trump, who comes over and only wants one thing, for him to buy his soybeans. Next, what does he want? To get those rare earth metals. Well, here you go, have some rare earth metal. For some reason, no one wants to ask. In 2007, the United States was #1 in rare earth metals. Why did they fall so far behind? It's all very simple, because there's a Leninist principle, actually Marxist, that capitalists will sell us the rope with which we will hang them. That's exactly what the Americans have been doing for many years, already 50 years. That's what they're doing. They're selling the rope to Italy that they'll end up hanging on. Now, for example, you see Lula da Silva over there. He's so incredibly corrupt, you honestly couldn't even find a single place left to put another stamp on him. Americans frequently come to him and offer deals for Brazil to closely cooperate with the United States instead of China. What do they get out of it? He says, well, make a proper offer, lift your sanctions, remove this and that, and then we'll talk to you. Why aren't they interested? Because China is their main partner. Just look at these sanctions against India. Honestly, they're just absolutely laughable when it comes to India. Trump banned all trade with India altogether. What is trade with India? That's 10% of all of India's foreign trade. That's the United States. That's basically nothing. What is 10%? You can get more if someone offers it, and the Chinese are offering much more. And India sells goods and services, 10% of all its goods and services. And when it comes to buying goods and services, they have a total of 960 billion, and only 27% of that is with the United States, the same amount as with Indonesia. So how can Trump dictate anything to India if he has nothing to offer them?
Yes, it's emotional, but those are the facts. Vyacheslav, thank you very much. Vyacheslav Maltsev, chairman of the National Committee for the Fight Against Putin, was on the air of Ukraine today. All the best to you. Goodbye.
Wishing you happiness. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Death to the tyrant, power to the people. Glory to Ukraine.
Glory to the heroes.